Hello, my name is Amit Trivedi. Let's understand the importance of education, information and advice in personal finance. And let's also look at the rights and responsibilities. What we'll cover in this chapter are two things primarily. Number one, the gaps in learning, and this learning is about the various financial concepts, the ideas in the personal finance or the important aspects of personal finance. While schools and colleges cover the foundational matters about the subjects, really the applicability of that is something that becomes a challenge for a lot of people. Add to that the complexity involved due to product innovations, technological advancements, changes in the regulatory environment, and all these things put together introduce what we call gaps in learning. While these gaps exist, regulators across the world and specifically within India have taken certain steps to help people become financially literate, financially educated, and we'll take a look at some of these steps. But before that, let's look at a survey conducted by Standard & Poor's. This survey is called Global Financial Literacy Survey. This survey was done across the world, which means spanning geographies. It also covered both the genders, the age groups, right from the youngsters to the elderly. Education levels and wealth levels were also quite diverse, and of course, the diversity of occupation was also covered, which essentially means that it sort of covered a very large section of the global population, and based on that, they arrived at certain findings. What are these findings? First of all, they looked at certain parameters like risk diversification, inflation, interest, and compound interest, and tried to understand the understanding of people about these 4 points. On each of the topics, certain questions were asked to people, and the way they answered determined whether they are financially literate or not. The financial literacy levels across the globe are not very encouraging. This is evident from the fact that only 33% of people across the globe were able to correctly answer all the questions. Where does India rank? In India, 24% could correctly answer. India is almost on par with South Asia, which is at 23%, and a little less literate compared to BRICS, which is at around 28%. So this shows one particular gap, that developed countries tend to have higher financial literacy compared to the less developed or the developing or the emerging economies. Within India, if we see, then risk diversification seems to be one particular area where the result is the poorest, while understanding of inflation seems to be far higher even than the global average. These surveys actually indicate where we stand in terms of level of understanding of certain important financial concepts. But let's go further, dive deeper, and this variation, as we saw, is reasonably poor and still the variation is also quite wide. For example, South Africa stands at roughly 40%, while India, as we saw, is around 24%. The gaps across the country also vary widely. While the financial literacy levels vary across countries, there is also a very clear distinction between financial literacy among men and among women. And across the globe, the pattern looks quite similar, that women tend to be financially less literate compared to men. In all these diagrams, the brown bar represents the men, whereas the black one represents women. As we can see, in the world, while men could correctly answer roughly 35% of the questions, 35% of the men could correctly answer 3 out of 4 questions correctly. That number for women is closer to 30. Whereas, if we look at don't know responses, so against each of the question when somebody says I don't know the answer, men stood at around 17 or 18%, whereas women were closer to 21%, which means 21% of the answers were I don't know. In case of men, the number ranged between 17 to 18%, and this is the world average. Major advanced economies, 3 out of 4 topics correct, men are almost touching 60%, women roughly 50%. And average I don't know answers, men are less than 10% and women are around 16-17%. What happens in emerging economies, and this again, while it shows the gender diversity, it also shows the difference between emerging economies and developed economies. 3 out of 4 correct, men are at 30%, women are at around 25%. Compare that to the advanced economies where 3 out of 4 was 60 and 50. In case of emerging economies, it's 30 and 25, almost half. And I don't know answers 20% men and roughly 30% women. These are good indicators for the financial educators as well as the regulators to decide where to put their efforts. When you look at the age profile of participants of the survey, people above 65 happen to have the lowest financial literacy among all age groups, and that's irrespective of whether it's a major advanced economy, whether it's emerging economies or the world average. And that's an interesting point, because elderly people in such case tend to become more vulnerable to financial frauds. And within that, elderly females are even more vulnerable. Keeping all these points in mind, the regulators, as part of their functions, as part of their roles and responsibilities, also put in efforts to educate the general public about various things, sometimes in educative format, sometimes in the form of do's and don'ts. Sometimes it is promotional in terms of promoting the knowledge and concepts, whereas at some times it's in form of various alerts. Stay away from 1, 2, 3. Keep these points in mind. So these are the messages, And of course, a lot of efforts have been put in by various regulatory agencies. Let's start with the Reserve Bank of India. If you go to Reserve Bank of India's website, there is a special section called Reserve Bank of India's Financial Education Initiative. This is on the website of RBI. What all does it cover? There are certain films, educative in nature. There are games that you can play to learn various concepts. I mean, gamification is a new buzzword. RBI implemented it way before the word became popular. And these games are very interesting, especially for kids, but even for adults, these games are quite educative. RBI also has quite a few booklets and other material for free download. Especially there are some concepts which are taught in a fashion of a comic book, making it interesting to read, making it relatable. So real life concepts, take for example a concept called monetary policy is explained through a comic book. The use of ATM and the things that one needs to keep in mind or the precautions that one needs to take are again taught through a comic book. The brilliant initiative, and this is something that RBI has done. What has SEBI done? SEBI has put up a website, and as you can see the top left corner, it says SEBI हर निवेशक की ताकत or हर investor की ताकत, and they have a website called investor.sebi.gov.in. This is SEBI's investor education website, primarily divided into three sections. Money matters. Let's understand. The basic concepts are covered under this. Investment, avenue to grow your money. Where all can you invest your money in order to see growth of the value? And then the third, within investments, what are the options within securities markets? And there are some articles and other things to learn more about these investment avenues. Similarly, there is an initiative taken by all the four finance sector regulators together. So you got the four finance sector regulators, RBI, SEBI, IRDAI and PFRDA. They have come together to promote an institution called National Center for Financial Education, or NCFE in short. While RBI will educate about banking and currency related matters or monetary policy related matters, securities markets would be covered under SEBI's initiative. IRDAI would educate people about insurance concepts, and PFRDA would educate about pension concepts. NCFE puts all these things together in the context of the life of a person and presents the content. And to that extent, it's a brilliant initiative of all the four regulators. As you can see here, there is a Money Smart School program, there is a financial literacy test, there are various initiatives of regulators which are covered out here, and of course, there are learning management systems and various resources. These resources you can access free of cost, and there are many downloads available, booklets can be downloaded, there are presentations available, there are films available. Using these resources to educate oneself would enhance the financial literacy levels amongst all of us. We talked about these financial education initiatives of various regulators and the NCFE, but at the same time, periodically they also issue various alerts and certain other forms of communication. And as you can see here, the three different regulators have put in various communications in mass media, and these are the real images of those communications. They could be either in form of education, जानकार बनिए, सतर्क बनिए, or it could be in form of an alert which says that don't rely on various tips that you receive on SMSs from strangers, right? So these are the potential frauds, and the regulator is trying to alert general public against these things. The IRDAI communication shown out here says, is your insurance company listening to you? It is more like a consumer service or consumer grievance redress kind of message. So you can see different alerts and communications from different regulators coming on a very regular basis. You can see that in mass media, you can see that in various websites or social media pages. The importance of financial literacy, the importance of education and information cannot be undermined. As the popular saying goes, a fool and his money are soon parted. Now, it's not to be understood in a derogatory manner, but somebody who does not know, it's easy to fool that person. Sometimes not taking effort to learn would keep one vulnerable to the schemes of the fraudsters. And from that point of view, financial education becomes not just important, but it's a critical life skill. On a day-to-day basis, we come across various financial matters, and this is where education becomes critically important in order to ensure that we don't lose. Regulators, as we saw in some of the examples, they are putting their efforts to pass information. They are putting their message in multiple ways so that we can easily understand, but eventually it is our responsibility to make the best use of this material that's available.